Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Today we're making a no-bake pecan praline cookie. Now this is a pretty simple recipe, and I did toast my pecans and my coconut. Just put it in the oven on 350 because my pecans were already chopped up and my coconut's pretty fine. It was about 3 minutes, maybe 4, and you want to give it a little stir. But what toasting it does is it really brings out the flavor of the nuts. Now you don't have to do that. That's a totally unnecessary step, and I did it before I started, so I don't have that to show. But you just spread it out on a cookie sheet, put it in the oven 350, and 4 or 5 minutes at the most. Keep an eye on it. You don't want to burn it. It makes the coconut crisper, and you can maybe see some of it is just a tiny bit brown. You don't want to cook it until it's burned for sure. Just that tiny bit of brown. Anyway, let's go over these ingredients. I have 2.5 cups of chopped pecans. It's cheaper if you buy your pecans already chopped, and you may already have them. 2.5 cups of coconut. I'm using unsweetened. You can use sweetened if that's what you have, but I also have 2.5 cups of sugar. So this is already a pretty sweet recipe, and I prefer the unsweetened in this just because it is smaller pieces. I like that texture better. Usually sweetened coconut is kind of bigger shreds, and I'm not as crazy about that in this recipe. I have 1/2 cup of white corn syrup or light corn syrup, 1 stick of butter, which is 1/2 cup, 1/2 cup of evaporated milk. You could use regular milk if that's all you got. It will work in this recipe. I'm going to put at least a teaspoon of vanilla in here. And I've got my Vanilla Feeds Tomorrow vanilla. I'll put a link to that again in the description of this video. And I'm going to add about 1/2 teaspoon of salt in this. And that's because the salt really brings out the flavor of the nuts. You don't have to add the salt if you don't want to. But let's get this started. You're going to cook this on kind of medium-high heat. And you're going to make a syrup kind of more like, it's going to cook up more like a fudge or some kind of candy than it does a cookie. Obviously, because it's a no-bake cookie, and that's just the nature of no-bake cookies. But you want to combine your butter and your sugar and your milk and your corn syrup, and everything else we're going to save until we get this cooked. And we're going to bring this to a boil, like I said, over medium-high heat, and we're going to cook it for about 3 minutes. Once it starts to boil, you want it at a full boil for 3 minutes. And you do want to use a pretty big pot to cook this in, because this syrup is going to kind of expand there when it's boiling, and you don't want it boiling over on your stove, because all that sugar in it, it'd just make a big old mess. And then you're going to add all these other ingredients here to it too, so you want to have room to mix it without slopping it. You are going to have to stir this, maybe not constantly, but pretty close to constantly, because it will burn if you don't, all that sugar and stuff in there. Okay, over medium-high heat, it doesn't take this real long to come to a boil. Now, I'm not quite at a full boil yet, but I am pretty close. Once it hits that full boil, you want to set a timer for 3 minutes. And like I said, you do want to stir this. You don't want to let this sit. It will scorch over that hot heat. Now I'm at a full boil. So I got my timer going there, and we just want to stir this for another 3 minutes. Before I come on here and I talk to y'all, I usually read my Bible for a while and, research, and I try to always find something to encourage you these days because I know how difficult things are. And this morning I was researching in Psalms 3, and I was on my computer and typed in Proverbs 3. And it's kind of, I don't know, to me it's always funny when the Lord does something like that. I was looking in Psalms and he took me to Proverbs, and it was just a mistake. But I went and I read Proverbs 3. And if you are having a hard time right now, I suggest that you read all of Proverbs 3 and maybe pray about it and study on it a while. It has a lot about learning from our mistakes, learning from the correction of the Lord, and not taking that as something bad. I mean, when you get to be my age, learning from your mistakes is one of those things that just kind of is a part of life. I mean, you do accept it and you submit to that. And Proverbs 3 talks about that, and it talks about how that leads to wisdom. And once we gain that wisdom, there are promises for our life. And I'm not going to read all of Proverbs 3, but I do want to share verse 23 through 26 with you. Then shalt thou walk in thy way safely, and thy foot shall not stumble. When thou liest down, thou shalt not be afraid. Thou shalt lie down, and thy sleep shall be sweet. Be not afraid of sudden fear, neither of the desolation of the wicked which it cometh. For the Lord shall be thy confidence, and shall keep thy foot from being taken. In these times, I know lying down and sleeping sweetly is not something that everybody's doing. But with God, you can lie down with that confidence if your trust and your faith is in the Lord, and have that peace that the Bible talks about over and over again. So if you're looking for encouragement, read Proverbs 3 and find that peace. Okay, our time is up. Turn your heat off. And we're going to bring our pot over here, and we're going to add the rest of our ingredients. Going to dump in our pecans, and this is going to smell good when you do this because that syrup is hot. It's going to heat those up. And we're going to dump in our coconut. I'm going to add a little bit of salt, just about half teaspoon, just to bring out the flavor of all those nuts. And like I said, you don't have to. And add in my vanilla. You do want to do this before this sets up. I'm going to do about a teaspoon and a half. Stir this up good so that all your coconut and your pecans are evenly distributed and evenly coated. This is a good no-bake recipe for summertime, especially if you don't toast your nuts and your coconut. But it's a good recipe to add to your holiday baking list, to make it Christmas and Thanksgiving and stuff. And I find that using a cookie scooper instead of just a regular spoon helps keep these even, and it helps the shape of them. You do want to cool them on some wax paper, and if you put the wax paper on a cooling rack, it won't stick to your countertop. You know how when you make no-bake cookies, you end up with them little round wax paper dots all over your countertop. Well, if you put it on a cooling rack, your cookies cool quicker and you can enjoy them quicker, and you don't have the little round wax paper dots all over your countertop. And you just scoop them out until you get them all done there. And it's going to take these a couple hours to cool. Now you can leave them kind of mounded up here, or you can flatten them out, and I'm going to do them both ways. They're good both ways. And because this is a boiled syrup, kind of like a candy, this recipe is affected by humidity. If you're making them on a really humid day, you might have trouble with them being too flat. I mean, you can see mine are holding their shape really well, and my syrup is not running off. If you make them on a super humid day, you might have trouble with the syrup spreading out and kind of your pecans and your coconut ending up in a lump that doesn't have any of the syrup on it. And that's not great. It's not going to change the taste of them, and they're certainly still edible, but it does change the texture. So kind of keep that in mind. I've had a lot of folks say that if they're going to be doing candy or something like this on a humid day, in the summertime, they turn the air conditioner down really low to help pull more of the humidity out of the house. And in the wintertime, they crank the heat up, which takes the humidity out of the house. So maybe if you live in a super humid climate, you can try those tips. Now, if you want to flatten some of them out, just take the back of a spoon and flatten them out a little bit and make them a little more like a cookie. If it's humid, you might not have to worry about that. They might be running everywhere. I'll dip a few of them out and then flatten them. They do set up fairly quick, or at least mine are today. In about an hour, they should be completely firm. It might take a little longer if it's humid. Couple hours on a humid day maybe. But I'm going to have to start working faster because mine are setting up pretty quick here. I actually toasted my coconut and my pecans today because I wanted to turn the oven on even though it's pretty hot to get a little more of the humidity out of the house. And it definitely does work. That heat dries the air out. I actually like them in the little mounds better. But you know, you can do them however you want them. If you want them flattened out so they look a little bit more like a little cookie, or leave them in the mound so that they're like a piece of candy. It's just, you know, whatever you want. And especially if you're making them at Christmas time or something, you might want them shaped different to fit in gift boxes with other goodies. And it is pretty easy to cut this recipe in half, you know, if you don't want to make a giant batch. That's all I'm going to flatten out. Just wanted you to see that you can flatten them out, make them kind of round. And how many cookies or candies or whatever you want to call them you get out of this is going to, of course, depend on the size of scoops that you scoop out. You can make them bigger or you can make them smaller. This is about a 1 tablespoon scoop. And personally, I think that's big enough because they are pretty sweet. But if you want them bigger, you can, of course, make them bigger. It's, you know, you're making it, do it however you want it. Now that makes quite a few cookies. Oh, and with things, you know, kind of getting more expensive and tighter, this is a good recipe to keep on hand. And if you happen to have some nuts and coconut and stuff left in your cabinet from maybe where you were doing holiday baking, and it's now July, which all this stuff I had. Everything that I used in this recipe I had in my cabinet, and the nuts and the coconut were both left over from, I don't remember if it was Christmas or Easter, but I had them from the holidays. So, you know, this is a good time of year to clean all that stuff out, so when you start baking for Christmas, again, you've got all fresh ingredients to start with. And it's not a super expensive recipe. Like I said, buy the chopped pecans, the ones that are already in pieces. They're a little less expensive because folks like the whole ones to make pretty candies. And while this is not super pretty, it is super tasty. And I'll bet, yep, these have already hardened up and released from the paper. It's a solid cookie that you can pick up and eat. And this would be a good one maybe to make this weekend and take and share with your Sunday school class or something like that. If you've got a lot of kids hanging around your house, this is not only sweet, so it satisfies that sweet tooth, but it does have all the nuts in it. So it kind of helps satisfy that hunger. If you're looking for something in the afternoon while you're cooking dinner, this is a good treat for that time of the day. So, hang on to this one. It's easy. It won't heat up the kitchen because you're only boiling it for 3 minutes. Good dessert for summertime, and also perfect to add into all of your holiday baking. Add this one to that list of stuff that you make at the holidays because it's a really good one, and it's easier than a lot of other holiday recipes. I really hope that all of you place your confidence in the Lord and you have that sweet peace and sweet sleep, and you are not worried about these troubled times. Until next time, please remember to put God first. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe before you leave us.